Okay, so this is a brand new workshop called How to Choose a Digital Notes App as Your Second Brain. It's kind of a mouthful. Um, I'm really excited to show you what I've come up with. Just to give some context behind this, around 5 years ago when I first started writing about digital notes and knowledge management, this wasn't a thing you had to worry about. This wasn't really a big choice to make because it was really just Evernote. There were a few others here and there, but I remember going to the Evernote conference. I think it was the last conference they ever did in like 2000, I want to say 14. And it was like a rock concert. People were dancing and there was music and David Allen was the keynote speaker and there was swag and it was sort of this huge event that people were super excited by. And then Evernote kind of went into its difficulties over the past years. And I think that's actually been good for the topic, for the field, because we've seen this incredible explosion. I mean, it's really it's like a cornucopia feast of different, not just notes apps, but knowledge management, information management apps in general. And it's really amazing. Really, there's a flavor to suit any taste that you can imagine. But then that's created a new issue, right? Which is you have to choose. You have to choose which of these communities, these user bases, which of these ways of life are you going to commit to? And part of my intention today is to sort of lower the stakes, to make it not quite so all-encompassing and scary, and like you have to make the right perfect choice the first time. I like to use the analogy of it's less like choosing your spouse and more like choosing your friends. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So this is sort of a nerdier, more insider workshop. I have my introductory second brain workshop called How to Take Digital Notes, which I did, I think, twice last week. You can see the recordings of those on the Second Brain Week website. But I need to say briefly kind of what I mean by a second brain if you're new to that. And I think the mindset shift here that I was just referring to is your second brain is not one thing. It's not one app, it's not one software program, it's not one subscription, one platform. It's really a stack. And the idea of a stack, it comes from technology, which is this idea that any product is actually not just one thing, but it's in layers, right? So think of your computer that you're probably watching this presentation on. It's not just a computer, right? There's hardware, which is the actual physical parts. There's the firmware, which communicates between the hardware and the operating system, which is this sort of program that runs all other programs. And then on top of that, you have programs, right? Software programs. So there's multiple layers. It's not just one layer that's doing all the work. So when I say your second brain, I really mean, you can think of it like a constellation. I kind of imagine this constellation of apps kind of orbiting your head, kind of in the cloud, kind of like satellites orbiting the Earth. It's this whole constellation of apps and plugins and integrations and tools and automations and subscriptions that all together as a whole make up what I refer to as your second brain. Okay, so that's kind of the first, I think, mindset shift that's really helpful is you don't have to choose one app to rule them all. And in fact, I don't think you can or should. That's kind of a recipe for procrastination, to be honest. It's a recipe for never really getting started with what matters, which is putting this thing to use, actually executing on this information that you've gathered. My second brain stack has changed. At one point, I was using Pocket, the Read Later app, to store things I wanted to read. And then I switched to Instapaper. At one point, I was using this drawing app icon. The name is escaping me now, but recently I discovered a new one called Concepts. I used to use a mind mapping app, an older mind mapping app, and now I use one called MindNode. So it's kind of like just as your biological brain is constantly evolving and taking on new beliefs and thoughts and ideas and ways of seeing the world, your second brain is also evolving all the time for various reasons. Sometimes A product gets shut down. Sometimes it becomes obsolete. Sometimes you change what you want to use it for, and suddenly the platform you were using just doesn't support that functionality. Sometimes you have a conflict of values and principles with the company. They do something you don't agree with. Sometimes all sorts of life circumstances can change, work circumstances, to make your second brain stack evolve. Okay. So that said, there is a choice to make, thus the reason for this workshop, which is when I look at this constellation, this stack of different tools, there is one kind of tool that is the one that it's most likely that people aren't going to have, right? A lot of people have web browsers. A lot of people have ebook readers. You know, a lot of these tools are extremely widespread, but there's sort of like there's a missing link. There's a hole in people's stack, which is sort of that central brain icon you see on the screen, which is where everything goes to. Where does everything end up? It's sort of like the repository, the database, the long-term storage, the long-term memory of this whole distributed collection of apps. So if you think about the stack, it goes from sort of more basic apps at the bottom towards more and more advanced or sophisticated or interactive kinds of software, right? So most people's first encounter with software for managing information was word processing apps dating back to the 90s. You know, Microsoft Word, those sorts of very basic writing, text editing apps. Those were really, if you look back in retrospect, geared towards formatting and printing. They were designed for publishing, for printing things. Then we came up with social media. It was more interactive, it was more global, and that was really geared for social engagement. I absolutely think social media should be counted as part of our second brain, right? It's the social brain, you could say, which is a huge part of who we are as humans. Then cloud storage came along. If you remember when Dropbox and other, you know, iCloud Drive and Box and these different apps came along, it was incredible. You could edit a file on one device and it would automatically sync to every other device. It was incredible. Then we came out with collaboration apps, like Google Docs, again, completely revolutionary. So all these parts, you'll notice each of these categories are still used, right? You don't no longer use word processing apps. You don't leave behind social media. You build on them, you extend them with new capabilities, kind of the way that a baby is born with certain brain functions, and then those functions expand and increase over time. So the missing hole, the missing link in our second brain stack is really, I believe, notes apps, and specifically digital notes apps. Okay, and the reason it's sort of the missing link is that they're the first generation of all these kinds of software that are designed and focused on creative output, right? You can use the others for creative output, but creativity has this essential quality that it's informal, it's messy, it's sort of chaotic. It's mixing and matching things together in random combinations. And all of these previous generations of tools weren't really geared to that. They weren't really designed for creativity. Now I think is the huge opportunity that we have in front of us is to adopt software in our lives that is specifically designed to enable our creativity, and that's notes. Okay, so at this point, I often get the question, why digital notes apps? I mean, of all the kinds of apps, there's databases, there's wikis, there's spreadsheets, there's mind maps, different things. Why is it digital notes in particular? And this is a question I've been working on for some time. I have a couple posts on my blog. One is called The Case for Digital Notes from back in 2018. Another one from 2017 called, I think, The Essential Requirements for a Note-Taking App, where I did a lot of writing and research on this. But I think I boiled it down to 7 things. Okay, this is my latest thinking. These apps, and these are sort of some of the most common you see up at the top, they're personal, right? It's personal knowledge management. It's not your company that tells you to adopt them. It's not your boss, it's not your team. You have to make that personal choice because this software is going to be integrated so deeply into your day-to-day life. Second, it's informal. Like I was saying, you need something, you know, it's like the digital version of a sketch on the back of a napkin. right? Why is the back of the napkin the quintessential, the birthplace of the great world-changing ideas? It's because it's informal, right? There's no standards you have to meet. There's no high expectations. There's no rigid structure. It's just the free flow of throwing ideas onto the page, or in this case, the screen. That's not a nice to have. That informality is absolutely essential. Third, they're open-ended, right? They're not about printing that document, exporting that video, finalizing that database. They're places that you can throw things down before you have an answer, before you know what they're for, before you know where they're going. Fourth, they're multimedia. This is something, there's a classic joke. If you try to add an image to Microsoft Word or even Google Docs, one little change, the entire document goes crazy, and all the margins and the columns and everything just goes completely wacky. Digital notes there's something, the way they're designed with these atomic, whether they're notes or blocks or pages, that are designed to sort of contain different kinds of multimedia, by which I mean not just text, but photos and images and links and attachments, PDFs, sketches, drawings, voice memos, GIFs, all the incredible diversity of multimedia that we now have access to and therefore want to save. Fifth, they're transparent. What I mean by this is you don't have to open a file to see what it contains. This is one of the big differences from, say, a bunch of text files in your documents folder, right? You don't have to double click and wait for some program to load. Once the program is open, every single idea and thing you have saved there is one click away. It's very kind of in your face, up front and center, without a lot of layers that you have to go through. Sixth, it's durable, right? These are things that last a long time. It's a database that gets upgraded from one version to another. You're not going to have, one random note that somehow was the wrong format or out of date. And finally, it's centralized. I mean, this is the key. One of the other key characteristics is you store something or save something on one device or edit something, and you don't have to export it or save or share elsewhere. It's in one place, but it's also in all places, because that same collection of notes is synced automatically across whatever number of devices that you use. Okay, that's my case for digital notes. Okay. So now I want to get into the concrete choices. So with those posts that I mentioned before on the essential requirements and different things, those weren't very practical for people, because you're not a software developer, most of you, who can go in and pick and choose exactly the features you want and then, make them into a software program, right? Most of us mere mortals, we have to just choose from what's on the market. We have to choose, we have to compromise. We have to choose the best of what's there and kind of find a balance between our different priorities. What's so cool is there's sort of three leading contenders that we're seeing in our students from the course that we teach, that kind of provide three very distinct choices that you can choose from if you just want a straightforward, practical, mainstream app. But before I get into that, Will, are there any questions or comments that I could address before moving on? Anything about sort of the buildup of context, like what is a second brain, why digital notes apps, and what we're doing here when I say building a second brain? I want to make sure that's clear before we really nerd out here about specific apps.
Yeah, no questions in the chat. I mean, we kind of got into that a bit while you're restarting, so I think there's a good amount of context, and I'll flag you if questions come up.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I'll definitely leave some time at the end for more discussion as well. I'd actually really love to hear everyone's feedback on this, this framework. Okay, so this is what we're seeing in the data. These results come from an initiation survey, an onboarding survey that every single one of our students takes, where we ask all sorts of things to just understand where they're coming from. One of the questions is just, which software are you using? This is not from every alumni we've ever had, which would be much more biased towards Evernote. This is just cohort 10, which happened in April, I think April and May. And you can see Evernote is still, you know, a solid, a little more than a third of people, which makes sense because that's the program that I use as an example. It's the one I use for my own personal note taking. But then we have Notion, which a year ago was maybe at 5%, is now at 23%, incredible growth. They just raised a bunch of money. They were in the New York Times. Notion is really, really growing fast. And it makes sense that that would be here as well, because that's what I use for my collective note taking. That's what I use as our team knowledge base. Everything that we do as a team, including running our courses, really all of our collaborative projects, we manage in Notion. So that's another big chunk, almost a quarter. And then of course there's Rome, which many of you probably know. I'm known for having a little feud, a little friendly feud with Connor, who is the founder of Rome Research. We met in San Francisco a few years ago and have developed kind of a friendly rivalry, which is not really a rivalry because we don't compete. I have a course, he has a piece of software. But Rome has really just come out of nowhere in the past year. I don't think it was even on this graph a year ago, to be 11%. And I'm guessing this cohort is going to be significantly more, since we now have a course completely dedicated to Rome, taught by Nat Eliason, as well as at least 3 or 4 of our alumni mentors who are implementing their second brain in Rome. So those are the 3 contenders. This should be pretty obvious by now, but we're really moving towards having Evernote, Notion, and Rome as sort of like the 3, how would you say it? Like the small, the medium, the large, the chocolate, vanilla, and swirl of personal knowledge management. You see there's sort of a quick drop off, still a significant amount of people, but almost 10% of people aren't using anything. They're coming into this new, which is awesome. Microsoft OneNote is always just kind of there. It's been around forever. It's installed by default on 1 billion computers worldwide. So it's a significant number. And then other, Google Docs, Apple Notes, Emacs, Bear, and then there's actually not even on this graph, probably 3 dozen, if you can believe that, between 2 and 3 dozen other note-taking apps that people are using, which to me, the more diverse and fragmented this graph gets, in some ways the better, because each one of these software programs promotes a different kind of thinking, enables a different kind of working. It's like a different lens through which you see things. I noticed that depending on the app you use, you'll have different kinds of insights. Your work and your thinking will move naturally in a certain kind of direction, because your constraints, your environment, which is what software is naturally biased in a certain direction, which I think is kind of cool. That's one reason that I like getting together on these events and just sharing what we know and kind of exploring and comparing and contrasting different ways of doing this. Okay. So a few days ago, as I was preparing and thinking about this event, this workshop, I came across this quote by Anne Lohr, who's a very well-known productivity note-taking expert who I follow. And I just thought it was brilliant. It was such a good model for thinking about these 3 apps. And it was pretty straightforward. It was based on this quote by George R.R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones. And it was that Notion is for architects, Rome Research is for gardeners, and Evernote is for librarians. Architecture, gardening, and librarianship makes so much sense. So this is kind of how I think of it. These are, you can think of them as personality types. When I say librarian, gardener, architect, see if you can just feel which of those personalities or those lifestyles or those environments even is most attractive to you. Which one of these images calls you or inspires you the most? I'm pretty sure that the most decisive factor actually in making this choice is just intuition. It's taste, it's personal preference. Even, I could have a 15-part flowchart of questions to answer to say which app you should use. But in my experience, even if logic points one way, usually your heart will tell you which one is for you. If not by looking at these photos, then by kind of getting into them and trying them out. In my experience, very quickly, one of them will stand out as the most attractive. So you can think of them as personal preference, but you can also think of them as stages of the creative process. Right? So let's take each of these at a time. Evernote is sort of like the library. Okay, so kind of imagine yourself in the library you see there. The library is all about, it's all about what's included in the collection, right? It's very black or white. Is it in the library or is it not in the library? It's very structured. It's very linear and hierarchical, right? A book exists in a certain part of the Dewey Decimal System, in a certain section, on a certain shelf. It has sort of a preferred location, or at least a location where it happens to be right now. Things exist, books exist in one place at a time, at least if you only have one copy. The library is about taking things in, right? If you're familiar with libraries, they have an acquisitions department. They have a department or a person whose job is to research what's come out, what's been published, and to make choices about what's going to be in the library. And that's a gatekeeper role. It's like an authoritative decision of what's going to be included and what's not going to be included. I had the opportunity to do a project, a training for the Palm Beach Public Library last year, to go to Florida and do a training for their staff. And the intake system was just incredible. It's a small county library, and they showed us in the back, you know, they had that usual book slot, and people would put books in, and you imagine it goes into just a big barrel. But they had this crazy conveyor belt system where it would read the barcode, and it actually had multiple pathways. It would route the book according to what kind it was into these smaller bins that then the staff could just pick up and take directly to that section of the library. Okay, so that's sort of intake, acquisition, you know, organizing or categorizing or classifying information according to what it means or according to which subject it speaks to. Then there's Rome. And Rome is the one I'm definitely the least familiar with, although I'm starting to learn about it and get into it. But a lot of people have commented, and the videos I've seen and the little experience I've had is that it's very much like a garden. A garden is all about connectivity, right? What connects to what? What plants interact with what plants? Which pathways lead to which parts of the garden? How is the garden laid out? What is the relationship of its parts? A garden is also extremely bottom up, right? You don't have to, you know, to plant one more tomato plant, you don't have to re-architect and reorganize the entire garden. It's like the actions that you take are very local. They're very kind of, you just see something you want to change, a vine you want to cut, a plant you want to plant, a weed you want to trim, and you just do it right there. So the garden sort of has a mind of its own, you could say. It has a logic or an intelligence that kind of emerges from within the notes, rather than being something that you either decide up front or that you do in a top-down way. And then there's Notion, which is, a lot of people have remarked, and I see it myself, as like architecture. You can just kind of add things to Notion as you go along, but either up front or at some later stage, you're going to have to take on the architect hat. You're going to have to decide what is the hierarchy of pages, what is nested within what other page, what are the databases which contain the most common kinds of information that I want to keep, and where are those databases referenced, or what are the columns within that database? There's these sort of executive decisions that you have to make from a design standpoint, and you can change them down the line, but there is a real parallel here to architecture. And we can, so towards the end of the hour, I can show you examples of these on my screen. But I wanted, before getting to that, there's one more thing that I want to share with you, which is sort of some of the logic behind these three kinds of tools. This is a screenshot from an online assessment called the Foresight assessment. For is spelled like the number FOUR. And a few people recommended this to me a few years ago. I took the assessment myself, I think in 2017. And what it does is it talks about thinking preferences. Okay, so this is basically my best theory, my current theory on why people so naturally kind of gravitate to one app or another. This is based on research from, I think it's called the International Institute of Creativity. This Italian doctor worked on it starting back in the 80s. It's a very super well regarded, really, as far as I know, pretty respected assessment. that classifies people's thinking preferences, okay? So basically what the research looked at is when people solve problems, when people have to come up with creative solutions, what's their preferred style? What's the, the approach or the lens or the technique that they most commonly use? It's kind of like that saying, for someone who has a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. We tend to not approach problems in completely unique ways. We tend to have a go-to approach, right? And these are the four types. There's the clarifier, who enjoys exploring challenges and opportunities, likes to examine details, wants a clear understanding of the issue. This is the person who always wants to get really, really clear on what the problem is and what the context is, what's the history, what's the background. And then the last point there is the potential drawback, which is you can suffer from analysis paralysis. And pay attention to these, because in a minute, I'm going to have a little poll for you, and we're going to see how this group breaks down into these three groups, into these four groups. The second one is the ideator. This is the classic big picture thinker. They enjoy toying with ideas, playing with ideas and possibilities. They like to stretch their imagination, to think in global and abstract terms, to take an intuitive approach to innovation. And then the drawback is they may have some details or some mistakes that are overlooked. Third is developer. This is someone who really likes to work on solutions, develop them, weigh the pros and cons, the pluses and minuses, to compare competing solutions, to analyze potential solutions before taking action, planning the steps, planning how it's going to be implemented. And then the drawback is they can get stuck developing the perfect solution. And then fourth is the implementer. They like to see things happen. They like giving structure to ideas so that they actually become reality. They like seeing ideas come to fruition, focusing on workable, what's actually going to work. They take the Nike approach to just do it, just take into action. And of course, the drawback is they may take action too quickly. Will, are you able to launch that poll, or do I need to go out of screen sharing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you should see a window on your screen. Go ahead and click the option that you think best matches you. Okay, 30 seconds. Just go with your first gut instinct. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Will, could you end it and then share the results?
Yep. Here, let me just send it to you.
Here, I'll just do it here. Okay, you should all be able to see that. Looks like ideator was first, 38%, developer was second, 32%, clarifier 20%, implementer 11%. Cool. Let me stop that. And now I want to show you my results. Ha, no one likes to implement. So this was I think it cost something like 30 bucks or 35 bucks to take the assessment. I really recommend it. It comes with not only this chart, but an entire PDF explanation. And these were my results. You can see 34, 38, 36, 35, which it's funny. When I first got this, I thought that's the most boring evaluation that I've ever seen. It really doesn't tell me much at all, except it's flatlining. But then it's interesting to see, I'll just share with you the results of the evaluation. They give you a type. They tell you sort of what kind of thinker you are, taking into account your scores across these four measures. And apparently I'm an integrator. This is the report. The assessment is much longer than this, but I bolded some of the parts here that I thought were very accurate, that really make a lot of sense and really help me understand my place, how I work with teams, what part of a project I should come in at, which is the integration part, why I get frustrated if someone is only pure ideation and they just want to talk about ideas all day and not actually put anything to use. Why I can sometimes frustrate people because I just want to take action before really there's consensus, all sorts of things. It's super, super interesting. But yeah, this is just a random plug for this assessment. But what I wanted to point out here is, so when I say your second brain, it's quite a lofty term. It's very sci-fi, it's very cyberpunk, it's very futuristic. I think the image that you see on the screen is what people think about when I say second brain, this just crazy, mind expanding global consciousness that we're gonna, upload our minds to the cloud. And, someday that's probably gonna happen. It's fascinating to talk about and think about. But as an integrator, I'm really interested in just what it looks like in people's day-to-day lives. How are these ideas, this idea that you can offload your thinking, your knowledge, your memory to an external system, how can it actually affect our lives today? And I think the best metaphor for that is note-taking. When I think second brain, I think of this. I think of these tiny little behaviors, these tiny little habits that we have day to day, writing meetings or writing notes during meetings or writing notes on a call or taking some highlights while reading a book or writing down a quote from a podcast or taking a photo of a poster that you see on a city street. These tiny little capture behaviors that are already part of our lives, that aren't this completely new thing that we need to take on, is really the best metaphor for this. And what I would say, and what's interesting is, if you look at the three different apps, I think there's an interesting parallel here to the thinking preferences, right? So I think more towards the left is the beginning of the creative process, more about clarifying, more about ideating, right? Evernote's really great strength that it still has to this day is capture. There's so many ways to get information into Evernote, which is good for collecting, gathering, sort of sourcing things. Rome Research, I think, is more in the middle of those four types that you saw. It's more about ideating. It's more about developing ideas, right? You can connect anything to anything. You can connect not just one-to-one or one-to-many, but many-to-many. There's a sort of evolutionary emergent process with Rome. And the Notion, I think, has some strong biases towards implementation and towards integration, actually. It's interesting, if you look in the world, anytime something needs to get done and needs to get done fast or by a certain deadline, it needs more structure, right? Let's say a government or a corporate hierarchy. The reason companies are hierarchies, the reason there's layers of the hierarchy and more senior people and a CEO who's in charge, is to move fast, to make a decisive decision and just move in that direction. And so some amount of structure, I think, is necessary to just kind of make something consistent, make something regular, make something reliable. And Notion is really, really good at that. It's really good at repeated things that you do a lot, that you need to reference a lot, that keep recurring and that you want to keep iterating on. And so that's sort of how I see the creative process, from clarification all the way to implementation, paralleling the different note-taking apps. And honestly, that's where the preference comes from. I think you naturally gravitate towards the tool that's going to support your thinking preference. Some of the research indicates or suggests that it's innate, that you can be trained or you can learn to do some of the other thinking styles. But which one of these you gravitate to is probably more to do with your personality and your temperament and your life history. And it's a great place to start. It's a great place to sort of begin your knowledge management skills, and then you can always expand from there, right? Like I started with Evernote, I took on Notion, and now I'm starting to get into Rome. There's sort of a natural kind of expansion process as you take on different kinds of knowledge management. Okay, do we have anything else? No, just that Building a Second Brain is open now, actually, closes August 24th. I think you've already gotten all the information on that. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, implementation is the part that no app can do for you. I noticed that was by far the lowest group, the lowest kind of results from this group. And I think in any group, implementation is always the hard part. It's always the bottleneck. It's always the thing that is going to be rare, is going to be difficult, is going to be unpredictable. And I think that's where training, where education, where skill building, and of course I'm biased because I'm a teacher, I'm an instructor, is so important, is the integration of all these different tools and parts of the stack so that you can actually just line them up, use them reliably to just produce, to implement, to create new things in the world. And that's, of course, my clear bias as an integrator. Cool. So we're at 47. Happy to spend, I can actually stay over the hour, 10 or 15 minutes to answer any questions. I can show you examples from those apps if you want to kind of see these ideas in action. But I really hope, and I'd love to hear from you either now in the chat or by Twitter DM or by email or whatever it is, what you thought of this, if it was helpful, if not, where you would like to see more guidance or more advice or less. Really, we do all of our work in collaboration and through feedback. So please give it to me and tell me how we can help. Will, where do you want to start?
Yeah, so first question from Bronson. I think this is pretty interesting. Should you pick the tool that is more fit to your thinking preferences and strengths, or a tool that reinforces or builds on your weakness areas?
Who is that from?
Bronson.
Cool, cool. Good to see you, Bronson. Oh, there you are. Yeah, I mean, this is a life question. In life, do you train and optimize your strengths, or do you address your weaknesses? Actually, Bronson, I'd love to unmute yourself, and I'd love to know what's your approach to that question in life, even beyond, like, what's your take on that, even beyond note taking? Do you optimize your strengths or address your weaknesses?
Hey, Tiago, thanks. This has been great. I would say that depending on where I'm at in life, in terms of feeling like I need to be more myself, to focus on being able to experience that more. But if I start to see certain parts of my life start to kind of degrade, then it's sort of a call for support in those areas.
Yeah, very wise. It depends. Yeah. So what do you mean by degrade? What is the evidence of degrading that you look for to tell you that, oh, there's something here that needs to be addressed?
For example, I may be in a very creative mode and I have a ton of ideas. A bunch of projects are getting started and developed, but then the implementation part is lacking, right? And then now you have all of these half-finished projects.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one I hear of a lot, half-finished projects. So when do you know you have too many half-finished projects versus just enough?
I think just a general sense of ideas not going to their full potential, and then a dissatisfaction with that realization.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Bronson. Dissatisfaction. There's some aspect of your life experience or your work experience that is dissatisfying. And I think we could probably map, oh, I can feel a table coming on. You could probably map what happens. I mean, the truth is you have to address all four, right? All human beings, modern human beings, have to clarify some things, have to ideate some things, have to develop some things, and have to implement some things. You could probably make a list of what are the symptoms that you're not paying attention to each one of those areas or one of those areas in your life. Right. And it's funny, you know, implementation is sort of glorified. It's held up on a pedestal, but there's serious downsides to over implementing. Right. It's really important to recognize that none of the types are better. It can feel like the one that you're not is better. Oh, I wish I could just be more of an ideator. Wish I could have a better imagination. Oh, I wish I could be a better clarifier and just put some thought into things before jumping in. But really, no one is better than any other. They're all just best in different situations, which I think is why collaboration is so cool, right? When I work with Will sees things that I don't even see because he's a different kind of thinker, and vice versa, right? This has been honestly my main motivation for hiring the team over the past year. I didn't really want to build a company. I didn't want a team. I just wanted to do my work and just have a simple life. But then I noticed every person we added was like adding a crazy, spicy new ingredient into the soup. And suddenly we could think in a completely new way, which I think is pretty neat. It's pretty neat that we complement each other.
Tiago, next we had a question earlier from Taylor Barada, one of our great Rite of Passage alums, asked, he said, Notion's not for him. He can tell that he aspires to be neat and structured and orderly, sort of the librarian Evernote style. And that's what he's been using. But his brain kind of naturally sees these unexpected connections. And so he's thinking, should he do what he aspires to do and be neat and orderly, or dabble in Rome? Or do you have any advice there?
Yeah, I guess I do. And this is kind of the earlier question too. I would say start with your strength. Start with the part of that four stage creative process, or the 3 apps or another app that is most comfortable. Because what's most important is that you do something instead of nothing, rather than that you do something perfectly, right? It's the getting note-taking to be just a part of your life, something that feels like it doesn't take self-discipline and energy and scheduling on your calendar. Once it's a part of your life, then you can improve it. Then you can strengthen it. Then you can adapt and evolve and innovate. If it's not part of your life, it's not getting the feedback and the exposure that it needs. So I would definitely start with your area of strength and then expand from there. You know, there's something here where I think in the past you would manage your entire creative process in one app, right? It's really funny. I've kind of studied the history of word processing. There's a book on the entire history of word processors. I have a tweet storm where I summarize the book if you're interested. One of the most fascinating histories in tech. The history of word processors. It changed everything about how we use computers. And the entire thing would be done in Word, you know, from the first ideas to the outlining, to the structuring, to the moving things around, to drafting the thing, to making the final manuscript that was publishers, right? Which today sounds crazy. So what I think tends to happen is the creative process is getting fractured, right? It's like it's splitting into little segments and little pieces, and then we're finding or creating specialized tools for every single part of that process. It's kind of like, there's an analogy to auto manufacturing, right? When cars were first created, it was one producer. One company would make the tires and the steering wheel and the metal body and the engine. And then the automotive kind of production line started fragmenting, right? A different company started making the tires, different companies started making the leather, different companies started making the drivetrain, to the point where today, you know, a company like Ford isn't really an automaker, they're an auto integrator, right? Their core competency is integrating all these little pieces of the supply chain to deliver a car. And it sounds insane, but that's kind of how we are now. We're not knowledge workers, we're knowledge managers. We are responsible for this complex supply chain of information with specialized tools at each step of the way. And we have to be the masterminds to put it all together and to deliver that finished, not car, but that finished, you know, knowledge product. And that's why my course exists. That's why I have a job, because that is such a difficult task to do. So I forgot where that started. That was kind of rambly, but oh yeah, start with your strength, and then expand from there. Once you have a base of operations, you have like a home base. It's so funny. It's one funny reason to adopt Evernote is it's so easy to switch to anything else, because Evernote has declined so much that every other app has an Evernote importer. I find this just hilarious, right? So it's actually a good reason to start with Evernote, because then if you want to move somewhere else, you just use the exporter or the import tool. So what I'm getting at there is, once you have a knowledge collection, it's infinitely easier to move to a different one. Whereas if you don't have anything in external form, it's a really heavy lift to get it out of this brain into the first thing. It's really that first step that is most important.
So we had a question about, you mentioned that you use Evernote for your personal second brain, but using Notion for the Forte Labs team. Can you talk through that? Just why and how do you use both effectively?
Yeah, let me share my screen. My computer is about to achieve liftoff again, so if I fall off, you'll know why. But let me just kind of show you visually the difference. Here's Evernote. I organize my notes, which basically this number right here refers to individual notes. And then those notes are within a notebook, which is this item. And then that notebook is within a stack. All a stack is kind of actually just like in the library, is a group of notebooks. So I organize my notes according to Para, of course, which is my organizational system that I really recommend as a way to organize your knowledge in this. Like, this is actually super related to what I was just saying. The power of Para is not that it's the best system or the most precise system or it covers every use case. It is that it can be used everywhere. So I have Para in my Evernote there. I have Para in my, I'm not going to try to open other things, it's too slow, but in my documents folder, in my Google Docs, in every place that I have information almost is Para. And what's so powerful about having just a tool for personal note-taking is no one else has to understand what this means. You can see I have acronyms, I have things that probably no one else knows what they mean, such as this secret project. You know, if I click into one of these things, oh boy, it's being super slow. You know, it's just very casual, very informal, bulleted, mostly bulleted notes. Okay, it's being, my computer's being super slow, but you can see, you know, very little structure, just a linear list from most recent to oldest, just because this is only for my use. Whereas if you go to Notion, so you can see a lot more structure. Okay, so this is the Forte Labs HQ. It's where we run all of the courses and the programs and the aspects of the company. And it's more like a dashboard, or it's more like an index or a table of contents, right? There's not really an equivalent of this page in Evernote because it's just simpler. It's like a filing cabinet. Things just go into the drawer or the file that is most actionable. But you can see here, you know, multiple people need to work on this. These courses that we teach have, you know, 20, 30 people involved in them. They can't just be a random collection of notes. They have to be structured. Our SOPs are the whole kind of usefulness of SOPs, which stands for Standard Operating Procedures, is that they can be reused and they can be reused by multiple people. So when we hired a personal assistant for my business partner, David, he didn't have to train her in all the ways that we manage the company. You can see here, it's quite a formidable list of, I think, 100 SOPs or more than 100 SOPs for every little task in our business. This has to be organized, has to be structured, predictable, you know, communicable. And actually the cool thing is Notion is completely managed except for a couple pages, such as the Praxis blog here, is completely managed by others. It's managed by Will, who manages these course pages. The SOPs are completely managed by my personal assistant, Bethany. It's sort of like I'm so quick and dirty and informal that the team doesn't want me anywhere near the Notion database. They want me out of there because I'm kind of the worst person for that. But it's just useful to have the division between personal knowledge, which is just for me, and team and collective knowledge, which is for the team or even external collaborators. Okay, I think I'm gonna be limited in my screen sharing because my computer is so slow, but hope that helped kind of show you. You can really see visually pretty easily the difference in those two apps and why I have that division between personal and collective. I know someone is probably asking me to show Rome. Not quite ready to do that because I'm still learning it myself. It would probably be embarrassing. I am, so that secret project TLR that you saw, this is the first time I've mentioned this publicly, but that's gonna be a new YouTube series called Tiago Learns Rome that I'm gonna release over, I think the first episode will be over the next week, which is just me narrating my thoughts and recording my screen as I learn Rome from like absolute zero to whatever level of proficiency that I get to. I really kind of wanted people to see it through my eyes and see my mistakes, and I'm clicking random buttons and trying to figure out what's happening. So that'll probably end up being a multi-part YouTube series with the first episode coming out soon. So let me just save the demonstration for TLR and don't tell anyone. It's just our secret. It's our 150 person secret. Yeah, the reason I'm releasing that this week is because of our Rome course. Nat Eliason, who's known for his course, Effortless Output with Rome, just interesting backstory, you know, he launched that course. It's been taken by a few thousand people, but he's realized that to really make a course good and to grow it and to improve it over time, it's more than a single person endeavor. So he brought his course over to our platform where you can benefit from our SOPs, our staff, our knowledge. We're going to be hosting monthly Q&As with Nat. We're going to be hiring a sort of a Rome alumni mentor who's going to manage the new online discussion forum completely dedicated to Rome. So basically, we're just trying to bring all the knowledge management communities together into one place and one community so we can just share what we know and so we can learn from each other. And that's going to take some time, but it's in the beginning stages.
I had a question from Marcus. This is a bit outside the digital note-taking tools. So if you want to focus on something else, understand. But he was asking about the Para system, and does that apply to your other folders and drives beyond just your Evernote or your Notion or your Rome? And if you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I use it, I think, in 4 places: Evernote, Google Docs, Documents folder, and my task manager. Right? That's what's so powerful about those 4 categories is they're universal. Right? A project transcends any one piece of software. So it makes sense that you're going to have to use multiple pieces of software, which means there needs to be some consistency, some sort of cohesiveness between those different apps. Right? They can't be perfectly coupled because they're made by different companies with different philosophies, with different design philosophies, but they can be sort of lined up, right? And often in my demos, I show how I'll literally work with my task manager. My computer's really about to explode right now, or else I would show you, but really I work with my task manager and my notes app side by side because the division there is actionable information versus non-actionable or reference information. Right? 2 completely different pieces of software with different priorities, but just having them open at the same time, I have my projects in both places. And that really what you're going for here is the seamlessness of the transition, right? When you transition from your task manager to Documents folder, to Google Docs, to Asana, to your mind mapping tool, to all these different places, it's already such a big leap, right? To switch from one interface to another. If you at least have the consistency that your projects are just named the same thing, use the same emoji, and are the same definition, like the same scope, you've already cut down the level of sort of mental complexity by half. You've in technical terms, you've reduced the cognitive load. So even though you're still changing interfaces, at least it's the same project both places. That's really all Para is. It's just consistency between interfaces. And if anyone wants to know more about that, Para it's super simple to implement. You can implement it in 15 minutes. Where that came from is I worked at the Apple Store in San Diego, and I would do these, they call them personal coaching or personal training sessions. And I would have 1 hour, someone would pay like a lot of money to come in and I would help them organize their computer. And what I realized is we couldn't afford to spend hours one by one filing every single file and folder and document. It would just take 10 hours and we wouldn't even get to what they wanted to do, which was create a video or create a photo book or create a website. And so I just said, okay, and developed over time, these are the 4 basic categories. Just dump things into those 4 basic categories according to how actionable they are. A minority of those files should go into projects because that's a minority of what you're focused on. And that worked so well that it then became this entire system. And I have a free, I think a 2-part series on the blog, which maybe someone could link to, that just walks you through how to use Para. And if you just search it on YouTube, there's not just me, but many other kind of YouTubers and productivity people have kind of described how they do it.
Question from Nandit. Thoughts on the current status of OneNote? We haven't talked about OneNote yet much today, but what do you got to say?
I know, poor OneNote. Poor OneNote. In some ways, if any software program should just dominate this field, it should be OneNote. You know, Microsoft is the OG, it's the original Office productivity. You know, what's the Microsoft like mission statement is so close to mine. Every time I hear it, I'm inspired, but also kind of disappointed. It's something to do with enhancing people's productivity. It's been around the longest. It's part of Microsoft Office. I really think if it had been developed and maintained and upgraded over time, it would just dominate this field. I think what's happened in reality is it's the neglected stepchild, right? Compared to the juggernaut of Word and PowerPoint and Excel, all the time and attention and money and press that goes to those, really by far the most successful productivity suite of all time. OneNote is just over here, pretty neglected and kind of ignored. Yeah, I mean, I really wish I could suggest it as a fourth option. And I've used it quite a bit, like the training we did for the library in Florida. The training was conducted in OneNote because that's what the, government computers have very, very stringent permissions. This is actually maybe one of the top reasons that I see people using OneNote is if you're a Microsoft company or organization, you know for sure that you can use OneNote, right? But my experience with it is it's too far behind. It's like using something that was developed in like 1995, where you have to like load a notebook from the cloud and it takes like multiple minutes. And then when you close the notebook, it's like putting it back into the archives. It's really kind of crazy. So I'd say avoid it. I'd say just avoid it unless you have no choice. Sorry.
Lynn mentioned Devon Think. I know there's Emacs. Assuming it might be a similar answer, but any thoughts on just other note-taking tools that are out there?
Yeah, it's fascinating to track them. There's, excuse me, there's some really promising ones. Bear, there's an app called Bear that's quite nice. I think it's sort of what Evernote would be if Evernote had been innovating and evolving and keeping up. It's sort of that same paradigm, but with some really cool improvements around tags, hashtags, just a cleaner, simpler, faster interface. I hear incredible things from Emacs and Org Mode, which is sort of the uber nerd productivity software developer tool of choice. It's basically like you can do everything I've described, never leaving the keyboard. You never have to touch your mouse. I've never been able to get into it. It's kind of too technical and abstract for me now. What else? There's some highly specialized apps that would seem to be the best ones for this, like Devon Think. There's one called The Brain. Their whole marketing is this: a lifetime, knowledge management system. But my experience with them is that it's funny. They're too focused on that use case. They're so focused on. It's very ironic. They're so focused on lifetime knowledge management that they sort of stagnate and don't take advantage of new generations of technology, right? They sort of protect and are sort of beholden to their old user base, and so they don't change, which is why I prefer general purpose tools, right? You look at Evernote, or you look at Notion, or Rome is maybe more specialized, but these are not personal knowledge management specific tools. And I like that on purpose. It means they're more popular and more mainstream, which means they're more likely to be updated, more likely to be supported, less likely to close down. It's funny when it comes to, and maybe this is my bias as an integrator, in implementation, but I like to be in the middle of the pack, right? I need my toolkit to be as absolutely stable as possible because it's a production line. My knowledge workflow is the manufacturing line in a factory, right? Where if you have one breakdown, one error, the entire thing grinds to a halt and there's no new product being created and everything is it's a disaster. So I go for absolute reliability. I prefer mature tools. I kind of like that Evernote, in some ways, that Evernote doesn't innovate. I'm never surprised. The database never becomes unavailable. It's just the same thing year after year. That said, what that creates is every 5 to 10 years, I have to switch. Right, I started actually on Microsoft Word, then my second brain was in Google Docs, now it's in Evernote. I think in the next few years, I'm probably gonna have to switch again. But I have no idea how we got on this track, but I just really prefer and recommend stable tools, mature tools, mainstream tools, well-funded tools. When people make free note-taking apps, I'm skeptical because I'm like, all these people are gonna entrust you with their life's work. and then you're going to close down because you couldn't make money, right? So I don't like free tools. Actually, I don't even like open source. I know this gets me in a lot of trouble because people are very fanatical about open source, but I want it to be a company that has an awesome business model so that there's some predictability that it's going to exist into the future, because it is a years long endeavor. You know, there's benefits to building a second brand that come immediately, but there's others that only come after 6 months, a year, 2, 5 more years. And I really want people to get to those benefits.
I'll mention real quick, there's a section of the course forum called interest groups. So if you're in building a second brain, there are small community groups for Dev and Think, Emacs, Bear. So there are other users in the course who use those if you're really tied to one of those tools. Tiago, maybe to transition, just talk about the course a bit. Somebody, Marcelo, I believe, asked, is it fair to say 50% of the course is focused on para setup and 50% is focused on improving our skill set? Is that a fair assessment, or how would you describe the sort of, just to maybe talk about the course a bit and what we'll focus on?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's split that way. How it's really split, and this is kind of new as of the last cohort in this one, is we're splitting the conceptual side, the methodology, from the implementation. So my job in the big sessions, which are going to be like this one, is what it really is to introduce a mindset and sort of a lens, a way of looking at the issue. And the issue is the 4 stages of code, which is my method for knowledge management: capture, organize, distill, express. So that's how the course is structured. My job is to introduce the frame, the concept, hopefully a bit of a paradigm shift, right? Instead of thinking in this way, think about it this way. And then the implementation happens with our alumni mentors. This is the whole reason we have alumni mentors, is implementation looks totally different if you are an elementary school teacher or a novelist or a corporate pilot or a mountaineer. And depending on if you're using Notion or Roam or Evernote or Google Docs or whatever other tool. So when we selected the alumni mentors, and there were, I think, about almost 40 applicants, we selected based on diversity of background, diversity of life experience, diversity of country, time zone, and app. And I think we have maybe 6 or 7 or 8 different second brain softwares represented in that group. So how it works is there's 20 of them. There's 20 alumni mentors who we've recruited and are going to be training over the next couple of weeks. Each one of them is going to lead a breakout workshop once per week for 5 weeks, which means, and I just sort of realized this a few days ago, that we're going to have 100 breakout sessions, which is just insane, right? Basically, this is no longer a course. It's more like a conference, right? You go to a conference, the first hour or 2 is the keynote address, right? Get everyone excited, really put them into the right mindset, introduce what the conference is about, but everyone knows the real learning happens where? In the breakout sessions, right? You see the menu of options, you highlight or circle the sessions by the most interesting people or things you want to learn more about, and then you plan kind of like a choose your own adventure kind of pathway through the 5 weeks, depending on your mix of goals and needs and apps and all these things. And so that's how we split the concept, which everyone is going to do together, or the methodology or the lens layer from the actual implementation. Let's see what else. Yeah, I think another way of thinking of it is as a sprint. You know, it's like a design sprint. We're all setting aside 5 weeks. There's going to be over 1,000 people in the cohort, you guys. I'm not sure if anyone knows of a situation in history that many people has come together to build a lifelong knowledge management system. I'd love to hear about it because I'm not sure there is. It's sort of like a giant collective intelligence mind meld where we all come together on the same schedule and on the same track, but the chats are just crazy with ideas and links and people going back and forth, and then they're scheduling calls to go off and, you know, people create new software out of these cohorts, like Random Note, which is one that I talk about. They go and they create meetups, like the one in Seattle, that are in different cities all over the world where they actually meet each other. Although I think with COVID, that's hard. They create new courses, kind of zeroing in on some aspect of the second brain. This is the best part. It's like this creative pressure cooker. It's not this one way of doing things that everyone must adopt and perfectly do. It's more like a festival. It's like the Burning Man or the Coachella of knowledge management. We all come together, and the point is not to consume everything, not in this course and not in life, by the way. The point is to just have the craziest mind-bending experience you can and to put the ideas into action. Like every single call, I'm going to be pushing you. How does that apply? How can you test that? How can you validate it? How can you skip steps, especially you clarifiers, from ideation and collecting ideas and just jump all the way to putting something out into the world, because that's when the learning really starts. So that's I think another mindset shift is you can't do this course in a perfectionistic way. There's way too much to consume, way too many avenues and possibilities. You really have to choose what you're there to accomplish and then find your way through that pathway.
What do you think, Tiago? Do you want more questions, or you want to?
Yeah, we can do a few more. This is fun. I mean, if this is getting boring, you can feel free to just drop off. We'll have the recording probably up until about now posted on the website. But I just love, in between cohorts, I don't really get to see you guys and interact with you. So I'm starting to get into the flow and into the feeling of what it's like as we like it feels like ramping up to this like big annual summit, which is kind of exactly what it is. So I'm kind of starting to get in the flow of it.
Nice. We had a question about second brain for students, so maybe that's a good one to jump to next. And then most of the rest of the questions will probably come in the chat. Tiago, I might drop myself because I think it's 7:30, but I'll let you all keep it rolling. That's the last question I have on my end. But if I don't see you all, I hope to see you guys in the course. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, students. So we have a scholarship program. It went out, I think on Friday or Saturday, to everyone that was on our email list. The email list for this course, there's like a special opt-in email list. It's a 50% off scholarship. We've tried full scholarships, it really doesn't work. We have the data that if we give this course for free, there's an almost zero chance that they're going to complete it. It's too hard. It's not a little self-paced course. You watch a few videos for an hour and then you're done. It's like, I mean, I'm totally transparent. It is a life-changing but really intense, like confronting experience because, and I didn't know it was going to be this way. In the beginning, I tried to do a self-paced course, didn't work. I think it's because our attitudes about information are some of the deepest held beliefs, right? Like abundance versus scarcity, like keeping things secret and private versus sharing, like how much you're supposed to prepare versus just act. Ideas about expertise, how much of an expert you're supposed to be before publishing your work, ideas about authority, ideas about credibility, like all these deep things that we have to surface and work through. And the way we do that is just collectively. I think that kind of change only happens socially. You have to see someone else changing in the way that you want to change, and then you believe it's possible, which is why diversity is so important, right? This world of KM is, like tech is already, white, middle-aged, male-centric. KM is like even more so. It's just insane, the lack of diversity. And it's something we're working on ourselves. We really are. The alumni mentors, for the first time, finally, are half men, half women, which is really took a shift on our part to use different language and different examples and different metaphors and to speak to different groups of people. I hope over the next year to have other kinds of diversity, ethnic diversity, national diversity. We're working on linguistic diversity. We have a guy in Japan and China and a few in Europe who are translating some of the course materials. It's because people need to see different definitions of success, right? There needs to be many different ways of succeeding at building a second brain besides Tiago's, besides Will, besides just this little group of people. Otherwise, it's just not going to be available to very many people. Not to mention the diversity of the students, by the way. In fact, that's the main source, right? It's why I can't emphasize enough how it's not my way and everyone do my way. It's more like a massive brainstorm. Every single cohort, I swear I learn as much from you guys as I teach you. right? I'm constantly there taking notes on what you're saying and getting examples from the forum and saving them to my own notes. My mind is constantly blown how people find new innovative ways of managing information and managing knowledge. Okay, I guess I need to go into the chat now. So it is too late to apply for the scholarship. We had a certain number of spots, which is why we sent it only to the email list that we have. And it's already way exceeded the number that we had set aside. So unfortunately, it is over for this cohort. If that's super important or it's going to be necessary for you, I'd say wait until the next cohort. Yeah, I would say if you did apply, wait to hear back either yes or no before purchasing. There's not going to be any advantage to purchasing early versus purchasing late. Cool. So I see a lot of different questions, but I think we're going to wrap up. Any last burning question? I can't really go back in the chat here, but any last thing you'd like some thoughts on? Yeah, I love this one. We'll end on Laura. Laura, could you actually unmute yourself? And I'd love to hear the question from you directly about changing systems.
Sure. So I went with Notion, and I built out some stuff in Notion, but I don't know if it's really the best match for my way of thinking. And I know if you had, maybe I should have started in Evernote because it's so exportable, but I didn't do that. So I'm curious if I was going to then switch over to Roam or something that was more along those lines. Is it just like start anew and then try to copy and paste stuff in, or what happens then?
Yeah, good question. It depends, as always, right? So here's what I would say is, don't focus on the functionality of the software, focus on what you're trying to achieve, right? Instead of, oh, here's a piece of software, how can I think the way that we often think about it is, how can I maximally use this piece of software, right? Because we want to feel like we're getting our money's worth, or even if it's free, we want to feel like we're doing it right. We're really succeeding, we're winning, we're following the best practices, we're not missing some major blind spot. We want to maximize the use of the software, but that's really not, like, if you think back to that supply chain metaphor, right? Imagine the Toyota production manager responsible for all steps of the chain, and they're obsessed about just one part, sort of over-optimizing, over-engineering one part. That's not their job. Their job is the flow of the entire system. So, like, I'll give you one example, is think of what is really the minimum amount of notes you could save and the type of notes you could save to start getting value. And what that often is book notes or reading notes. Right, so you saw my flowchart kind of diagram. It's so tempting, and I'm sure I probably promote this, to want to save everything right from the start. Oh my gosh, I need all these images and these PDFs, and I need the mind maps and all my bookmarks from my browser and all these different things. But then you get caught up in capturing, and you don't yet have the habits and the skills to make use of all that stuff you're capturing. So instead, what I would tell you to do is, presumably you read something, whether books or articles or blog posts or something like that. See if you can get just that kind of information from the beginning all the way to the end of the system. It's kind of like creating one little narrow channel where you have to actually figure out each of the steps. And it's much easier to do that for one kind of content rather than trying to create the whole system from beginning to end for every single kind of content all at once, which is really challenging. I just published a massive post called The Ultimate Guide to Summarizing Books. If someone could drop the link to that in the chat, I'd appreciate it. And that's really what that is. You can just get book notes and take them all the way from reading to a summary blog post. And that's an awesome way of sort of testing, like a little microcosm of the second brain idea, only focusing on book notes. And honestly, it's kind of the 80-20. If you only ever did your reading notes, your book and article notes, you'd probably get 80% of the value of a second brain with 20% of the work. honestly, you know, reading is one of the hardest mental things we do. So it makes sense that you want to take advantage of that. So Laura, what I would say is do that. What are you trying to achieve? What is the one kind of information? And you might actually find it spans multiple apps. Maybe it starts in Instapaper and then it goes to Evernote, because Evernote has very good integrations, like with Instapaper. But then once it's in Evernote, which is like a filing cabinet, maybe then you put it into Roam to connect ideas and come up with insights. But then you realize, oh, I want to collaborate on this, and it goes to Google Docs or Notion, right? That sort of minimum, it's like a minimum viable workflow, even though it's across many apps, is far superior than having the perfect Notion setup, which, you know, all the YouTube videos are about that, the perfect Notion setup, the perfect Evernote setup, the perfect Roam setup. But I'm always like, well, what did you create? I would be much more impressed if you had a messy, ugly setup and you had this really cool book that you wrote, or a website that you designed, or a podcast that you published. I'm really impressed by those outputs, not by aesthetically pleasing little note-taking apps. Oh, so that's my rant. Okay, I'm gonna go, everyone. Please, I'm gonna put Will's email address here. Will, unlike me, is very good at responding to emails. And if you have any question, even the questions here in the chat, please send them to him. He'll answer if he knows the answer. If not, he'll send them to me. And I'll answer them either via email or sometimes via a blog post or a tweet or something else. So I'm gonna take off, but thank you. Thank you for being part of this, and send me any feedback you have. And I'd love, of course, to see you in the course, which gets started now very, very, very soon. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.